Hey everyone, Aparna here from Rethinking Tech. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to a unique collaboration that we are doing with UNICEF, an organization that has been near and dear to our hearts for a long time. In a world where children and young people, those most affected by ongoing changes ranging from tech innovations to climate change, are often left out of the conversations on how to navigate such changes, UNICEF's Innocenti team has developed a Youth Foresight Fellowship. 2025 fellowship focused on the future of education, where 15 fellows across the world were given the opportunity to anticipate emerging challenges and potential in learning and child rights for the future. So please join me in welcoming 4 of those fellows, where they share with us what their research taught them and why it matters for all of us today. Beatrice, thank you so much for joining us on Rethinking Tech.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Really excited to talk about your research, which delves into AI-powered learning hubs in Ghana. What inspired you to focus on the intersection of AI and education? And what gap did you hope that your research would fill?
The first thing was the fact that AI has become a buzzword and everybody is talking about it. But do we also talk about the young people who are in underserved communities who can have access to it and understand how to use it? That was one of the main things that motivated me. Another thing that's motivated me is how it works. I see it as a tool that could possibly bridge the divides. But then also there are like other aspects of it that through my research I discovered that made me think, hey, if we decide we're going to use AI for the benefit of children, we might still have to be cautious because it's a double-edged sword, as people say.
Then also, when you talk about children, what age were you looking at?
In my research, I looked at young people between the ages of 15 to 24.
Let's talk about that double edge that you found and what your hypothesis was going in and what you found coming out of it.
And my hypothesis was that obviously there were going to be divides. One thing I wasn't expecting to find out was this narrative of teachers and students having different perspectives or perceptions on AI. Students see it as a tool to, extend their learning experiences and give them more opportunities. But teachers also raise concerns on their mental health, on their social relationships, and also they raise questions about their critical, reflective, and also cognitive skills. When I went into the research, I think one participant mentioned that there's a difference between young people or students who are trained to become intellectuals and people who are just trained to replicate knowledge. Right. So this was something that really got me thinking. I had to ask follow-up questions like, what do you mean by this? They mentioned that as AI has come, there's this kind of child culture of fast feedback loops, getting easy access to information and all of that. They are scared that young people are failing to actually fail because there's this also new thing of just getting the feedback. You assume it is correct, you copy, you paste. They are not failing to actually learn from their failure. They are not using their critical thinking skills and reflective skills. And on the learner's perspective, they didn't understand why teachers are not embracing AI because they see it as a positive thing that is currently in our system. So these different perspectives made me think, okay, how can we leverage AI to ensure that this gap that is being created in pedagogy is bridged? And also, how can AI step in, not to widen these digital divides, but rather bridge it?
There was this one quote that came out in your research that really impacted me. And one of your participants said that it sometimes feels easier to approach AI than their teachers. That's really powerful. What does that tell us about trust, communication, and even the future role of educators?
I quite remember in that workshop, we were having an open conversation. It's always a safe space that we create. It was a lady, I clearly recall. And she was like, sometimes she feels shy to ask questions in class in the first place. And then to take the bold step to ask a question and be told, this question is not so great, ask better questions. It's just horrible, right? Obviously, more trust is going to be given to the tool that is not going to criticize the child for asking a question that apparently is silly, right? But these are some things I think we should really be cautious of. And this goes to tell us that young people observe. And if we are going to allow like a tool, a machine to become who they trust, then there's something we are doing wrong.
Especially because it requires a reframing of educators as well, right? It's not just guardrails, it's not just policies for AI, it's not just how children should be interacting with it. Based on your findings, were there certain ideas or steps that you think educators should be implementing going forward?
I had a few recommendations. The first one I would like to talk about was teacher training. AI has come to stay. If it's here to stay, then it means that we have to really well equip our teachers. We have to train them to understand how to leverage AI in teaching, how they are supposed to relate to young people and safeguard them when it comes to this new tool that has been introduced. We also have to take their thoughts into consideration when we are redesigning our curriculums. The next thing is safeguarding. Safeguarding deals with AI ethics, the biases, AI hallucinations. How do we teach children to identify misinformation?
Interesting. So this wasn't just recommendations for teachers, it's also recommendations for students and how to learn about misinformation and be aware of it, but also for society, right? You said that you have fears that AI could deepen inequality between rural and urban schools. So what early interventions or policies do you think could prevent that from becoming a reality?
We have to identify infrastructures that we have and infrastructures we don't have. If we have a clear landscape, clearly stating, okay, these communities in Ghana do not have access to the internet, or maybe only 50% or 30% of young people have access to digital tools that can use AI if we even decide to incorporate AI in our curriculums. What can we do so that when we've identified them, when we have funds, then we can say that, okay, the urban areas have, it is these communities that do not have. So let's push them there. How can we ensure that's equity or that leveled ground so that young people have equal access? That would definitely be one. Another one would be conscious efforts in bringing in teachers and young people in rural and urban areas, and actually giving them the platform to understand how these digital tools work, which is why I suggested AI learning hubs. One of the things that I really highlighted was having young people in rural and in public schools visit urban and private schools occasionally to work with them, because young people in urban and private schools usually have better access to the internet, better access to these digital tools, and even sometimes have private tutors.
If you're going to be bringing students from one area to the other, it also then opens up ideas, and also people can see from areas that are maybe less resourced what others are getting, and maybe it would even result in more equality. Okay, I want to switch a little bit to your geopolitical thoughts on this, because at Rethinking Tech, we always try to talk about geopolitics, since our world is so connected, but still so beautifully different. Many global education tech companies are shaping how AI tools are entering classrooms in Africa. So how can Ghana specifically, and even African countries more broadly, ensure AI integration serves local needs?
This is a question I'm really excited about, because that was another thing that popped up when I was doing my workshops. I engaged a few teachers in my workshops and my research, and they told me something very fascinating. They mentioned how there are no synergies between local tech companies and the government. The government shared tablets for young people in the school that I visited, and apparently they don't yet have access to Wi-Fi. Students are not supposed to use their own SIM cards in the tablets. So if they are not supposed to use their own SIM cards and there's no access to Wi-Fi or internet, what is the main goal or essence of sharing these tablets? Because then it means they are just there. The students can't use them either. Young people putting in their own SIM cards means there's no surveillance. No one can tell what they're Googling, what sites they're visiting, what they're doing with the tablets that had been shared that were supposed to actually help with the digital divide. So these tablets had to be taken back and locked up. I know one technology in Ghana that leverages low tech to give internet accessibility. So imagine the government had partnered with this organization before they had gone ahead to implement the sharing of this tablet. So that's one thing I would say, build synergies with localized or local technologies.
I like to end with a future-looking view that if you could deliver one message to policymakers, tech developers building the future of African education, teachers, everyone, what would it be?
With the policymakers, I would say that please build synergies with existing tech solutions that are in Ghana. Teachers, please be open to learning about new technology and also demanding to be taught about new technology and demanding to be in spaces where your voice is heard when it comes to reshaping education. Let's add our cognitive skills to our learning with ChatGPT, or let's say other AI tools that are in there like Perplexity.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Korkemay, welcome to Rethinking Tech. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
You've done some incredible research, and I want to know what drew you personally to study how young people with disabilities imagine the future of inclusive education.
The main reasons why I choose this topic was my background as a person who grew up in a very isolated town in Mangistau region of Kazakhstan that has always the lowest performance in PISA assessment and huge problems with equity and access to quality education. I also have a close relative, my cousin, who faced many institutional barriers throughout his life because of his diagnosis. I think my background that drive me to choose this topic. And during my bachelor's degree, I also had a chance to work at legal support service for parents of children with disabilities. And I started wondering what happens after school when they graduate and enter post-secondary education. And when I searched for information about youth with disabilities, I found a huge gap in data. I believe my research is a huge addition that could fill in this gap.
And why do you think people who don't know anything about this research, have never read anything about this space, should care about your research?
Inclusion is one of the global problems in the whole world, and especially in post-socialist societies, as in Kazakhstan. We still have some elements from our post-Soviet system, some model of disability elements where children are segregated and still perceived as something new, but actually should be the norm. Many people notice that there is a huge difference in legislation and the actual practice. For example, all children have rights to access any educational institution, but there's a lack of monitoring about evaluating the quality of inclusion and the accommodation they have. Those with disabilities present very small share in the whole total student population in Kazakhstan. I found some reports where it says it's only 0.4% of students in higher education getting the recommendations to improve disability inclusion in education is very crucial.
I think this is a problem we're seeing globally, and it sounds like Kazakhstan has made a lot of steps forward in being more inclusive, but there is still a long way to go. In your research, where you said that you found many youth with disabilities still face systemic barriers like inaccessible infrastructure or limited program choices, but, and this is the part that really got me, you said they still remain deeply optimistic.
There were many positive views about the future, I think, due to technological advancements that they are actually experiencing now. Many participants with visual impairments shared that now they have access to screen reading programs. They were very optimistic. Actually, that was a really surprising thing for me, because before I had the hypothesis that maybe we will talk more about the barriers, but not the opportunities. However, there are still some questions of people's safety, especially deaf individuals. For example, they still cannot call to the police or an ambulance during emergency situations.
You mentioned that Kazakhstan has some ways to go when it comes to accessibility. Have you seen any countries that we should be using as examples of places that are doing it right, and maybe not perfect, but at least doing it better and are consciously working on it?
We can take an example of the United States. And actually, we have some special schools that collaborate with the schools in the US. For example, Perkins School for students with visual impairments. They have the huge exchange of the teaching methodologies and how they use assistive technologies. However, special educational institutions and disability inclusion in mainstream schools is still a huge question in Kazakhstan. We still see the huge segregation. So parents prefer special schools over mainstream schools because of lack of accommodation in mainstream schools. But still, mainstream schools have low quality of education. So I think special education and inclusive education should go hand in hand.
It's good to have almost like a goal and see a blueprint of what's being done and then work towards that. And so in your research, you also worked with young people in both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Did you notice any geopolitical or cultural factors that shaped how they viewed inclusive education? And using what you saw across those two countries, can you extrapolate what that might mean for people across the world?
Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they both used to be in the Soviet Union. Most of my participants were the graduates of special schools. I noticed minor differences. For example, Uzbekistan, particularly special schools in Tashkent, could save the educational system of full secondary education for deaf students, while in Kazakhstan there is a lack of special schools. Even in huge city like Almaty, our former capital, there is no special school that could offer full secondary education, which means deaf students cannot enter higher education directly after graduating from school.
And taking that analysis, if you applied that to the rest of the globe, what would you anticipate as a trend, or what would you see as a correlation between involvement and improvement and how that really works with the country?
I found something interesting while conducting the research. I recently recalled one conversation with methodologies at Rehabilitation Center for the Blind. She said that during Soviet period, she imagined the future where technology and medicine would be advanced so much that there won't be no children with disabilities, so no blind children. And she was blind herself, which I believe that there's a shift in the perception of disability. I've never heard from young people that they want to change something related to their disability or get rid of their disability. And our countries are slowly shifting towards social model of disability.
Say more. What is the social model of disability?
Medical model of disability is when disability is perceived as something that should be cured or fixed. So the problem is in the person. While social model is more about the society. So a person is disabled by the environment, let's say, because of the inaccessible infrastructure, buildings, and other social services.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of other countries can also apply very similar learning. How do you think emerging tech can be designed to amplify inclusion instead of resulting in exclusion?
Digital divide is a huge problem in Kazakhstan. I believe that technology would really helpful in, for example, changing the formats of acquiring the information. In Tashkent, I had a chance to meet with one NGO that works on supporting citizens with disabilities. And they're also the direct partners of the Ministry of Social Protection and Labor of Uzbekistan. And in their website, they have 4 formats of information, which is like the audio, and they always include the sign language translation video of the same information, the text version, and also the simplified text. For example, for individuals with mental disabilities to deliver the same message in simpler language. So I think we can use the potential of AI to ease this process, and maybe all of the materials in the future will be provided in different formats, which can be useful not only for people with disabilities in particular, but for all.
Are you feeling optimistic when you see how technology is coming out and the new developments, and to see how it could help support people with disabilities? And are you seeing anything in the space in terms of new innovations or new companies that are offering solutions?
I've seen some scientists who work on special toys or tools to teach children Braille. And I've seen that people use it in rehabilitation center for the blind individuals in Almaty.
Wow, that's great. It's hopeful then technology will make this easier and make the world more inclusive. I have one final question for you. If you had 1 minute to address global policymakers or tech designers directly, what would you tell them about building a future where every learner, regardless of ability, has a seat in the classroom?
I would say that everything begins with the social attitude. So the law we impose, the technological advancements will not mean much until we change the social attitudes. So making sure that everything is accessible, and I would say empowering people with disabilities and directly having consultations with them would be very helpful in developing those policies and technology and new innovative devices in the future. I would like to share about the quote of one of my participants. She shared that it's still so frustrating that inclusion is still perceived as a step towards something new, but actually it should be the norm. So it's guaranteed right for children to access education, to access any social services, but still in our society, it's still perceived as something new. So it shows a low awareness of inclusion. That's why, again, it shows that there is a need to work on the social campaigns and changing the social attitude towards disability.
And I think a lot of it will come to policymaking and education, right? Making people aware at a younger age of these differences and that they should be celebrated and not something that should be used to divide society further. Hi, Crystal. Welcome to Rethinking Tech. I've read through your research and I'm really excited for you to share it with our audience. Can you please tell us why they should care about your research and its findings?
I think why research matters and everyone should care because my research was talking about artificial intelligence and education, which are two very important things at the moment. Right now, all learners in school, whether it's children or young people, they all deserve to learn in a language that the future understands. I believe part of that language is artificial intelligence. And the problem with what we have right now is that the language that is currently being used for education is outdated.
Okay, so your research really does explore AI literacy as a foundational skill for the future. What drew you to this topic? What gaps did you feel weren't being talked about enough in conversations around education in Kenya?
First and foremost, the educational system in Kenya is already outdated, and there have been a lot of efforts trying to ensure that artificial intelligence is integrated into the educational system. I feel like this might fail because if we are not changing the educational system in its entirety, then it feels like just adding something new to a system that's already failing. It means it will all fail together. So educational system needs to change and be made better.
Okay, so AI is really a tool that should be used, but it's not the only solution to the educational reform that you think is needed. One of your participants said, "I've always hated school, but loved education." That line was really powerful. How did that sentiment shape your understanding of what's missing in Kenya's current education model?
I think that statement literally captured all what's wrong with the educational system in Kenya. They're really eager to learn, to gain new knowledge, new skills. Schools should be an enabling environment for that to happen. So I think why that is important is that statement is essentially telling us that education in Kenya really focuses on things like who's better than the other, so who's performing better. This leads to learners not actually grasping what's being taught or fully understanding because really they're trying to see or to make sure they emerge the best.
So your study pointed to a term I'd never used before. It was the imagination gap, not just a skills gap when it comes to AI and the future of work. So what exactly does that mean, and how are you seeing it show up in young people in Kenya today?
A lot of our educational systems have a very linear perspective of what success means. Therefore, we are only allowed to think in one way. Everything in the world is becoming bigger, better, more sophisticated, and I believe education should do the same. Give learners a chance to see, think, and feel what is currently happening in the world. Because if that doesn't happen, they don't have that chance to imagine the possibilities.
One of the things that you highlighted in your research was that many students learn about machine learning and data ethics through social media before they ever encounter them in the classroom. What does that reveal to you about the pace or the priorities of the formal education system in Kenya?
Learners, young people, and children, for them to go to social media or look something up, it means they're interested in reading about this or learning about it. And that also goes to show that these are very important skills because I don't think anyone would be looking up anything if they didn't think it was important or would be valuable in one way or another in the learning journey. They are the people that are getting this knowledge and education. And so if we continue to not consult them, I fear we might even get to a point where learners actually don't want to go to school anymore and they feel like it's better to just learn by themselves because at the end of the day, the information is out there. But then I feel like it needs to go now to the schools and learning institutions so that learners are actually learning things they find interesting.
And on Rethinking Tech, we always try to question new technology. We're not techno-optimists, we're not techno-pessimists, we're trying really hard to be techno-realists. So what do you think it would take for schools to teach not just how to use AI, but also how to question it, to think critically about bias, misinformation, and fairness? What is that balance?
So I believe we should be moving away from telling or discouraging students from using artificial intelligence and actually encouraging them to use it. And now we should actually be trying to figure out how to test them on how well they're using it.
I agree with you. Students are going to use it regardless. And in fact, I agree with you that if you tell them not to, they'll use it even more. Okay, so Kenya is often seen as a digital innovation hub, but a lot of the global AI models still draw on data and values from elsewhere. So thinking more broadly, taking a step outside of Kenya and into the African continent, how do you think African countries can shape AI education in ways that reflect African culture and ethical context?
And I believe one of the most fundamental ways is actually trying to be very loyal to our roots because a lot of what we take in as we are using like artificial intelligence and everything is very Western. Yet we have our own cultures, we have our own traditions, which already worked for our ancestors because if it didn't work for them, then we wouldn't be here. So actually tapping into that very intentionally and then coming up with our own chatbots and everything. So even the data that should be used in programming these chatbots or building any more tools should be very African and not forgetting we shouldn't forget our roots because they worked. And I believe with that we can use that as the foundation to build on what's already there.
You argue in your paper to shift from fixed curricula to meta learning. And meta learning, I believe, is defined as teaching students how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So in the future, what would your ideal classroom built on that philosophy actually look like?
Educators strive to teach learners uniquely human skills. I say this because first of all, we already have a very big unemployment problem, and it's not just in Kenya, it's global. And I fear if we continue with the same educational curriculums that we have, we are only teaching learners things that AI can already do. And once they get to the job market, then we have learners and AI competing, and AI will win because, as we know, at the workplace, people strive for efficiency and also cutting costs. So, if I can have artificial intelligence do what you can do as a human, why wouldn't I just use it? So, I believe our classrooms in the future should really focus on teaching learners uniquely human skills. So, critical thinking, emotional intelligence. So, once we have that, I believe we can have a world or even learning spaces where learners are not dependent on artificial intelligence or technology.
Okay, last question for you, Crystal, and I've been asking everyone this. If you could design one policy or one partnership or have one conversation with the government that would make AI literacy universal across Africa in the next decade, what would it be?
To ensure it's taught as a foundational skill, meaning it's taught right from primary school through high school and also in tertiary institutions. And I believe once that's in place, the rest takes care of it.
Soumeya, welcome to Rethinking Tech. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Before we dive into it, can you just take a moment to explain to our audience why they should care about your research and its findings?
My research topic is second chances of education, inclusion for girls who have missed their education or had to drop out of school. The reason why I was so motivated to choose this topic is because I myself
received a second chance in my life that helped me become who I am today. I unfortunately didn't finish my education due to health complications. I spent many years just sitting at home doing nothing. Then I received a second chance called Safia. Safia is a program supported by UNICEF for school girls who miss their education for any reason, health issues or community complications. I received training and support there, and now I seek the same training and support for other girls.
That's incredible. That probably means your research wasn't just an academic pursuit. It was something that you truly cared about.
Yes, deeply.
Your research focuses on families, and you mentioned mothers specifically, but families as drivers of girls' education in Mauritania. So what inspired you to center your study on the family unit instead of policymakers, government, or classic institutions?
Well, one of them came to me and said that she's thankful of her mother because apparently her mother was her second chance of education because her mother is a teacher. She said that because of her mother being a teacher, that helped her a lot taking good care of her education.
Your research also highlights that some girls internalize social norms discouraging schooling. How do you think we begin to shift those norms from within families and communities instead of imposing change from the outside?
In our society and the communities that we live in, they really take it so seriously, and it's so very important for them that a girl is to be ready for marriage and having a family of her own. But a girl that's not educated, how can she support that family or herself? She'll end up having many kids, and the kids are gonna be having so many issues and problems which she can't even solve or understand in education. So if we educate girls, we're not just having a housewife or a woman ready to serve the family. Not just that, we're gonna have a woman who is also educated and will help everyone. Like, just in general, we're lifting a whole family. We're changing a whole family's view and a whole family's life positively.
It's not about just one person. You're still contributing to the community as a whole. The community will be lifted higher if more girls go to school and get education. Another thing your research showed that really surprised me was that language was a bit of a hidden barrier in the classroom. For people who aren't familiar with Mauritania, how does the linguistic diversity and dominance of French and Arabic intersect with gender inequality in education?
I remember myself when I used to go to school, it was an issue at my time. And even now, I was surprised because the girls kept mentioning it. Here in Mauritania, we have 4 different ethnics, and each ethnic has its own language and dialect. So, for example, me, I speak Hassaniya. Hassaniya is a dialect taken from Arabic. Sometimes girls who speak Hassaniya, it's so difficult for them when it comes to French. It's not their native language. They have another language they speak and they understand with. So when the teachers are trying to explain subjects like math and science, which we know that they are like difficult subjects, in a language where you don't really understand, it's going to be so difficult for you to understand. Maybe if someone spoke to, just explain to her with her own language and her simple terms in her own language, she might understand the subject.
It feels very unfair that girls are written off because the language of education is not the language they understand. And your report then also mentions how there's translation technologies that could change these classroom language barriers. How do you think low-cost AI translation or speech tools could change this educational map or this educational barrier for multilingual African societies?
I was thinking about this and it popped in my head, and I said to myself, what if there's no longer a language barrier? And I was thinking about these translating tools that are like popping now in our times. And I said, this can be a major solution for the problem. I don't mean like there need to be fully dependent on the AI tools, but at least it can like translate to the girls everything that they're couldn't understand.
That would be beautiful and worldwide. I mean, this isn't just an issue for Mauritania or Africa. This is happening worldwide. You also mentioned that mothers are catalysts for change for girls today in their education. How do you imagine fathers, brothers, and local leaders becoming allies in girls' education in the future?
I really imagine them listening to their girls and having conversations with them. And it's also so very important for the fathers and the brothers to be involved, because some of the girls also said that sometimes when they have extra lessons, it's such a difficult time for girls to move around and go and take a cab and everything. She said that sometimes her brother takes her, but sometimes when her brother refuses to take her, she just sits at home and she doesn't go to the extra lessons, and she feels that she needs to go. So brothers and fathers, like, being involved and caring about girls' education is also such an important thing that I hope to see in the future, because it matters.
It really matters, and that's beautiful because it makes sense. I mean, last question for you. If you could speak directly to education ministries or tech companies that are investing in Mauritania's future, what single policy change would you want them to implement to ensure every girl's right to learn is protected and amplified?
Well, from my experience, I know that second chances matters, because a second chance changed my life, and a second chance can change other girls' life. I say listen to girls, support girls, and do whatever it takes for them to have proper education. And if there's anything that ever made them quit their education, please, it's not the end. They can still be included, and they can still be given a second chance. There can still be a program created for them, or they can still be included in schools again. Just a second chance is what I'm asking for, because everyone deserves a second chance.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you so much for joining us on Rethinking Tech. I really learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Thank you for having me.